This is Get Uncomfortable, the podcast where we talk race, politics, religion, and all the things with me, Adam Smith. Audiologists are healthcare professionals who identify, assess, and manage disorders of hearing, balance, and other neural systems. Being a deaf audiologist can help these healthcare professionals relate to their patients, but what about when an audiologist is both deaf and blind? In this episode, we're joined by my friend, colleague, and forever student, Dr. Jasmine Simmons, a Black audiologist who has Usher syndrome, a rare genetic disease that affects both hearing and vision and causes deafness or hearing loss, and an eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa. Jasmine Simmons is from Columbus, Ohio. She graduated from the University of Akron with an undergraduate degree and later earned her doctorate of audiology from Central Michigan University. But her journey is much more than academia. It's a testament to resilience. Dr. Simmons faces a rare challenge, Usher syndrome. It affects her vision, hearing, and balance. Born profoundly deaf, she wears a cochlear implant, unlocking the world of sound. Her personal journey fuels her empathy as an audiologist. She personally understands the emotional toll of hearing and vision loss, forging a deep connection with her patients. For Dr. Simmons, it's not just about diagnosing and treating, it's about empowering individuals, especially Black and Brown children, to rise above their circumstances. Dr. Simmons is co-founder of the Black Audiologists United, a Facebook group that fosters a community of Black audiologists and audiology students to feel seen and included in spaces that were not designed for them. Currently, she works at a nonprofit clinic where she channels her expertise to give back to the community. Dr. Simmons also takes to the stage as a public speaker, raising awareness about hearing loss and deaf blindness. Beyond her clinical and advocacy work, Jasmine is an inspiring author. She's working on a children's book series that sheds light on Usher syndrome's challenges and triumphs, aiming to inspire young minds. Dr. Jasmine Simmons, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Let's get uncomfortable. Dr. Jasmine Simmons, welcome. It's such an honor to have you here. I hope all is well. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. And I'm very excited to be here with you guys today.
We're excited to have you. Let's just get into it. Jasmine, talk a little bit about your journey to college, because we always talk about to and through college. Talk about that journey and the role your parents and your family played, especially helping you and your brother deal with your deafness and to deal with the life of a cochlear implant. The deaf community is interesting. At least I know that. And so there's certain feels about cochlears and that transition about having that. Talk about that journey to college and how that played out for you in particular.
Absolutely. So when I was born profoundly deaf. And at the time, it was in 1994, and cochlear implantation was FDA approved at 1990. So it was still very relatively new. Actually, it was FDA approved in 1990 for pediatrics. So it was relatively new. And so my parents had to make a decision on putting their child through a surgical procedure. So my brother was born in 1992, so he got his cochlear implant in 1994. And then when they learned I was deaf as well, they decided to implant me as well. Although my brother was implanted, it was still a difficult decision to make because they had no idea what the outcomes were going to be. They hoped that we would be able to hear cars crossing the street at our house. So that way we can go to the playground across the street. So that was their initial hope. And when we were able to hear a whole lot more. It exceeded their imagination on what we could do with our hearing abilities with the cochlear implant. So as we got older, our parents really pushed us and encouraged us to be the best versions of ourselves and not let our disability hold us back. They always pushed us, and was if we use our disability as an excuse, they were like, absolutely not. You're going to do it regardless of your hearing loss. You're going to do it. So because of their persistence and motivation, it really led into my success, graduating from high school, college, and into my doctoral degree program.
Well, and you're an audiologist. So for people who, first off, if you can explain to us a little bit about for people who don't know what a cochlear implant is, and talk a little bit about, some of the culture around it. What are some of the challenges? I know you've shown me pictures of your first cochlear implant and what you have now, and it's like looking at a car from the 1970s and a car from 2023. So talk a little bit about what a cochlear is, what it does, and some of the consistent challenges within the community about the acceptance now. And I think some of those challenges have went down a little bit, but just give us some background.
Basically, what a cochlear implant is, it is a surgical procedure. So the surgeon will put a electrode on the skull. Now, it does not pass the skull. It's just onto the skull. And then they insert the electrode right into your hearing organ. So it essentially replaces the hair cells in your hearing organ. And instead of listening acoustically, you are now listening through electrical signals. So basically, there's an internal piece and an external piece, and they communicate with each other. And that's how someone can be able to hear through a cochlear implant. So people often ask me, what do I hear? And I always tell people, I hear naturally. I was born deaf. That's all I know. People's voices sounds different to me. I can tell a male voice is speaking. I can tell a woman's voice speaking. I can tell a children. I can distinguish who is talking with my cochlear implant. So it is wonderful technology. It's not a cure by any means. It's not perfect. There are still times I am not able to understand and follow along, and I have to ask people to repeat what they say. So it's definitely not a cure for all. With the deaf community, there is a controversy with cochlear implants. Some people who are what we call a capital D deaf. There is capital D deaf who is people are involved in the deaf culture. And then there's lowercase d deaf who identify as medically deaf. And I am little d deaf. So for some people in the deaf culture, they may feel cochlear implant is something that is trying to fix them, and they don't want to be fixed. They see it as it's part of their identity and who they are. And I totally 100% respect that. And so from my perspective, I'm a little D deaf. I love having my cochlear implant. I wouldn't change it. However, I do respect people having a decision if they want to get a cochlear implant or if they want to be in a deaf culture, because that's so important. They need to have that choice. And we live in a world that we deserve to have choices in regarding what we want to go about our hearing needs and communication needs.
No, it's really good. And I think it layers on so many other things that we're going to get into, but the reality is people aren't broken, right? And so that's what I've heard from the deaf community is that some feel like, well, we don't have a disability, we just have different abilities, right?
Absolutely.
And so the reality is then we're using science to correct brokenness in some people's minds, when the reality is in other people's minds, it's just about safety and quality of life and things like that. So you
Absolutely.
really did a great job of highlighting that for us. So now you're an audiologist, right? When did you decide you were going to be an audiologist? And tell us a little bit what an audiologist does.
Absolutely. Um, when I was in seventh grade, I went through my little midlife crisis. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life. And I just knew I wanted to help people. I just knew that was what I was destined to do. So I was in the car with my mom having a conversation. I was like, I really don't know what I want to do. And she looked at me and was like, why not become an audiologist? And at that moment, it just stuck with me. I was like, wow, that's exactly what I'm meant to be and what I'm meant to do. So I just held on to that goal from 13 years old. And I was determined, once I have something set in my mind, I am going to accomplish that goal. So about 13 years later, 14 years later, I went and graduated with my doctoral degree and became an audiologist. And so what an audiologist does, we assess hearing imbalance. We also treat hearing losses if someone wants it to be treated. So we do hearing aids, we do cochlear implants, we also assess tinnitus. And tinnitus is basically ringing or buzzing, hissing in the ears. We also do auditory processing disorders. So we do a lot of different things, and we just want to make sure we assess patients based on how they want to be assessed.
Well, and you are so dang intersectional, who you are. You're a Black woman, you're deaf, you're all the things, right? And so talk about, because you and I talked off mic about this, how being deaf and now having this vision loss that's happening that we're going to talk about, and also being a Black woman and also having a partner and all these things, how does this make you a better audiologist and relate with your patients better? I'm sure you see people that will only come to Dr. Jasmine. So talk about not just the hearing loss piece, but the whole piece of your identity that is so unique in the space, which sometimes we wish it wasn't so doggone unique, but everything about you, how that you feel like, do you feel like that makes you a better audiologist? Talk about that a little bit.
Being an audiologist, being a healthcare professional as a person of color is huge. We hear stories about, the BIPOC community gets lack of proper care and treatment just because of their skin color. So being an audiologist has been so rewarding from person of color standpoint. When I call my patients back and they see the fact that I'm a person of color, they see a Black woman, you can see the relief on their faces, just knowing that they don't have to be discriminated just because of their skin tone. So it's just amazing experience to be able to relate and to be able to understand and just make sure that patient is being heard, seen, and validated. Those are the three important things, because I personally have gone to different eye doctor's appointments and I left that office not feeling heard or validated or even seen. So I made sure I carry that experiences over into my clinical practice and make sure that my patients feel that they are being represented. They feel they're being heard, because I felt that way and I never want to make sure my patients feel that way.
It's so good. Yeah. What were your three again that you said? Seen, heard, and validated?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So proud of you. Talk a little bit about your practice because you work at a nonprofit, right? You could be out, shout out to all of our nonprofit folks, but the truth is, you got people have student loan debt, people have all these other things, and you've chosen to be in practice at a nonprofit clinic that can provide some of that healthcare access to kind of break those cycles. Talk a little bit about why you chose to be in practice at a nonprofit space and how that maybe differs from some of the for-profit clinics that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I learned that the nonprofit serves the underserved population, that was one of the things that drew me in. I remember when I was a graduate student, I went to Detroit, VA, and I did a rotation there. And we were doing a hearing aid fitting, and I saw a brown hearing aid. I was looking at the hearing aid, I was very confused, and I couldn't figure out why. And then it dawned on me, I have never seen a brown hearing aid because I've been fitting so many people who were not in the BIPOC community. And so I've gotten so used to seeing just beige hearing aids. So when I went to this nonprofit clinic, I see brown hearing aids every day, and I feel accepted as a healthcare professional at that clinic because I worked in other settings and I felt like as a healthcare professional that I had to continuously prove myself and prove my knowledge and prove my worth as a healthcare provider. So at being at a nonprofit clinic, I feel like the walls are down, my guard is down. And so it's just amazing. It's not only beneficial to the patients, it's also beneficial to me as well. So it's a very rewarding job. And I just truly enjoy being able to help patients here. And we also have a program where we give them free set of hearing aids if they meet the income restrictions and they must live in Jacksonville, and they get free set of hearing aids. So just seeing these people's faces light up, and when they come back in for their follow-up visits, they are telling me stories. Oh yeah, I'm able to understand my grandkids. So, now I'm able to work and understand my colleagues just because of these hearing aids. And people take hearing for granted, and they don't truly understand the importance of hearing until they lose it. So when it's being brought to them, they find that sense of happiness and fulfillment. So it's just absolutely a rewarding job.
Love it. Well, and I think that, there's this old adage, right? When you have a bad experience, you tell 10 people. When you have a good one, you tell one. Now, people have heard in the get uncomfortable space that doesn't apply to Black and brown folks. When we have a good experience, we tell 100 people because we don't have the privilege of assuming good experiences, right?
Yeah.
So we're still a front porch community. We aren't back deck people. And so privilege makes people assume all their experiences are going to be good. And then they tell people if they don't have a good one, especially in the healthcare space. I can imagine your organization, your clinic, and you get all these referrals from people like, girl, I had, and she, and all the things, right? Because for us, we are still very communicative oriented, front porch, but we don't have the privilege to assume good experiences. So when we have good ones, you have all at Duval coming to see Dr. Jasmine because they're like, okay. And then people say, well, I'm not going to see anybody else. My cousin told me to see Dr. Jasmine. So I can imagine how rewarding that feels. And then on top of it, you're deaf. What do your patients say when they find out, when they're losing hearing, and then they find out the person who is their doc, who's working with them, is also deaf?
Sometimes I disclose my hearing loss and sometimes I don't. It just depends on the situation, because I don't want to always make people feel like it's about me. It's about the patient. So if I feel the patient needs to hear that, I will disclose my hearing loss. I will share with them, because a lot of times it's stigmatized, hearing loss and aging. Oh, I'm getting old. So I come in, I'll tell patient, listen, hearing loss can impact anyone. It can impact children. It can impact young adults. It can impact older adults. And I usually will share that I was born deaf. And sometimes they're like, oh my goodness, like I didn't even know, like I couldn't tell. So I'm like, exactly. So it's okay to accept the fact that you have a hearing loss. And sometimes people are just not ready. And if you're not ready, I will just back off and let them go home, think about it. And I'm here when you need me. So,
well, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about the word belonging. Not just that you are intentional in ensuring your patients are centered and you're not centering yourself, but you're intentional in ensuring that they have a sense of belonging, and how the clinic, the patients, your colleagues have created a sense of belonging for you, right? And I'm thinking about how important belonging had to have been in your undergraduate and graduate journeys. Talk a little bit about the sense of belonging, the support that you received in undergraduate, graduate school that helped you be successful.
Absolutely. During my undergrad career, I had such an amazing support system. When I did the Choose Ohio First program, I just had that amazing support, and I didn't feel left out or left behind because of my disability or because of all these potential statistics, negative statistics that were counting against me. I felt seen and heard as well during my undergrad. And for same as graduate school, I felt very supported by my professors. I remember when I first started my class with one of my professors, she asked me if I could talk to her after class. And she told me, I've never worked with a student with a profound hearing loss. How can I be a support of you? And that was instrumental. Like that was just something I still remember to this day. And it was just amazing, the fact that she took the time to, educate herself and ask me what my needs are. Because I always tell people, every person may not require the same accommodations. So each person may ask for something different. So I appreciated that my professor at that time took the time out of her day to explain or to ask what I needed. What surprised me was my peers. Some of my peers did not understand how to interact with someone with a hearing loss, although they were going into that field. So that was what was more so surprising to me. Not everybody, it was just a few. So I had to take the time to educate them to how they can treat someone with hearing loss.
And people that are going to school to be audiologists.
Yes, sir.
We're struggling with, it's like somebody who's studying women and gender, or somebody who's studying AFAM or studies, race and gender work, having to have the Black woman or the queer guy or the intersectional identity brown person explain to them, well, you went into this work, bro. I mean, you went into this work. Why? That's a hard piece for you. I still think about, and for y'all who don't know, Jasmine Simmons is my student. Okay, so before she was even in college, she was my student. And in undergrad, how steadfast your parents were, how supportive they were, because you were trying to be a little bit of a student athlete. And there was a push pull between us, the program that was giving you scholarship and support, and what you were trying to do athletically. And at some point, you and your family made a decision that your academic pursuits were number one, and you weren't listening. And the reality is, the folks from athletics, I still remember calling and yelling at me because the Simmons were not taking athletics advice. They were taking this. And now you're telling me the story from when you were 13. That's why, right? Because it was, and our job was teaching you how to self-advocate and how to center yourself and how bad of a woman you are and how you can, it isn't your job to teach, but it's your job to also demand equity in all of those spaces and to be seen and heard and valued. And I still remember Schrank Hall, God help us, and how we sat and had those conversations. And it wasn't like you or your parents even wavered with, well, yeah, we got to take this class and we may have to be late for practice. And we're going to be a speech, but I think with speech pathology was the undergrad, right?
Communication disorder.
Communication, CD. Yeah. And how it often with student athletes, what happens is, well, this major doesn't really work with practice times and you're going to require clinical and you're going to require all these things. But it was no doubt with you, more importantly with your parents, that nope, we're not going to listen to athletics. The folks that are supporting our daughter's academics are saying this is what we need to do. And you made a choice at that point. And I still remember the ire of our friend in athletics calling and yelling at me and me saying, you have to talk to her and her family. And how you learned through all of those times to advocate for yourself, to center yourself, and to be the kind of claimer of space that I think helped in some of those experiences in grad school.
Absolutely. Just my determination and just my support system and, my determination has helped me to be where I am today.
For sure. Well, and you've helped me learn about this disease, this Usher syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know much about it because it's pretty rare. So can you educate us a little bit about Usher syndrome? And did you always know that you had Usher syndrome? Is that what caused your deafness and your hearing loss? What does that Usher syndrome thing look like? Explain it to us and educate us, please, Doc.
Sure, I can explain what Usher syndrome is. Usher syndrome is a genetic disease or genetic condition that affects your hearing, vision, and balance. So there's 3 different types of Usher syndrome, and then there's subtypes within those types. So I have Usher syndrome type 1D, which is one of the rarer forms of Usher syndrome. And so that was the reason why I was born profoundly deaf. And at the age of 7, I was diagnosed with a condition called redness pigmentosa, and that is a key sign of Usher syndrome. So, and that is basically just a degeneration of your retina. So my vision has been deteriorating pretty much since the day I was born, but it just wasn't diagnosed until I was the age of 7. Throughout the years, I have noticed that my vision was getting worse. However, I was in denial about it. It wasn't until I was home for winter break from college. For whatever reason, whenever I open my eyes at nighttime, I'll open one eye. And it looked like I was wearing sunglasses over one eye when I was staring at this nightlight. And it just looked very just cloudy. It just looked very dark. And then I closed that eye and opened the other eye. And it was so much fuller, bright. And at that moment, I knew that I had Usher syndrome. Well, I knew that I had eye condition. I just thought, I was just living in denial. I was like, yeah, I don't have any eye condition. But at that moment, I just knew. And I just sobbed that night. And so throughout the years, my vision just slowly progressed. And I used to joke, oh, I'm not gonna drive by the time I'm 30, like, ha ha ha, just to kind of help cope with my vision loss. And it wasn't until the age of 28, so this past February, I was diagnosed as legally blind. And at that moment, I sold my car because the eye doctors were like, you should not be driving. And in my heart, I knew I shouldn't be driving anymore because I just lost that confidence once I got that diagnosis. And I just knew I needed to make that best decision for myself and for my safety and the safety of others. So I made that decision then, and it was very, very hard. It just, I definitely grieved at that moment because, as a 28-year-old, giving up her car that is your independence. So it took a while for me to learn how to redefine what independence meant to me.
Mm-hmm. And you and I have talked about this. It's got to be scary. It's got to be scary for somebody who's born with significant hearing loss, who's navigated undergrad and graduate school with all of the things, a whole Black woman, a doctor, and then now we have to admit to ourselves that we're legally blind and that the vision probably isn't going to get better unless medical science figures something out soon. Talk a little bit about those impacts and some of your worries. And then I know you have a lot of work. I mean, you're an audiologist by trade, that's your vocation, but your work is speaking and training and writing books and impacting. Talk a little bit about how that has been a refuge for you at a time when, this Usher syndrome thing is impacting not just your hearing, not just your vision, but sometimes your balance too.
Can you ask the question again? I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
had
So
the first part and then I was like, ah.
yeah. So yeah, I tend to ask too many questions. So talk a little bit about how, obviously Usher syndrome and making the choice and realizing I have to give up my car. The car and the independence is one thing, but the reality that your vision is going at the same time that your hearing has been affected, at the same time it affects your balance, and your whole job is these other senses, right? Talk a little bit about how you process that, how you work through that, especially as a person of color in those spaces.
Mm-hmm. So when I sold my car, I want to note this because I remember how profound the feeling was. So earlier that year, I had lost my cat. He passed away suddenly. And so I remember grieving. And so when I had sold my car, I remember feeling the same way that I felt when I lost my cat. And I remember feeling so silly because I'm like, a car and your animal, like, how is that the same? And then I realized, it dawned on me that it is the same. I was grieving for a loss of something, and that it really opened my eyes that grief is the same thing. It could be different, things that you lost, but ultimately you're going to feel that loss of something. And so that was really eye-opening for me. And how I coped was I decided, I sat down and analyzed, where do I want my life, what direction I wanted my life to go. And even though I had all these successes, I was just wondering, I'm like, where do I want to go? Where do I see myself being happy? And writing a children's book was one of my lifetime goals. And that's what jump started that, me selling my car. And I decided, I'm going to write this children's book. And it's called the Usher Syndrome series. And my very first book is covering a little Black girl who has hearing loss. And I decided to write this book because for several reasons, I did not have that representation growing up. And I never saw me in a children's book. When I say me, a Black girl who had hearing loss. There's always books out there, that have hearing loss or, has something, but I have not seen a Black character with a hearing loss. So that was something that was really important to me. And as I was writing this book, I noticed that it was my therapy. It gave me an outlet, and I was able to express my thoughts and feelings through the book. And it was really helpful. And also, I had started my Instagram account this past summer, and that also has been my therapy. And I got connected with a bunch of people in the Usher syndrome community virtually. And just, all of us being able to share our stories is beautiful. We're all in different stages of acceptance or denial or anger. And so it's just beautiful to be able to talk to different people and to be able to share our stories, our similarities, and our differences. So this vision loss, it's been a challenge, but it also has connected me to the Usher syndrome community.
Well, and you liking it to grief, because you just talked about some stages of grief: acceptance, denial, anger, all these things, right? And I can imagine you're not grieving the physical thing of your car. It wasn't like, oh, you had a Lambo, I guess. Maybe not, Doc. But it's grieving independence. It's grieving a season of life that is now over. But the beauty of what I'm hearing from you is that then you have this other season that comes in, and the stuff that I love so many things about you, and I'm proud of so many things about the person and the woman you are. But this positivity, even when it's in a place of doggone. So now it is. And then at some point it's okay, let me see what the plan is for me and how I can make an impact. And the part that when we talked to Rochelle a couple of weeks ago about her journey to electrical engineering, and we talked to Shelby about her journey through exercise physiology and all the things, one of the things that makes me the most proud of my students is every single one of you all aren't just committed to personal success, you're committed to impacting the world and making the world better, right? I mean, yeah, for all of us, we kind of outkicked our coverage. I mean, we're all in a pretty good spot. And so the best part is every single one of our students is so committed to saying, I'm going to make this world better. That's our work. Our vocation's our vocation, but our work is different, right? One of the things, the best, because you do consulting work, right, and speaking work, and I know that there are continued challenges with communication with healthcare professionals, especially with people of color. You touched on it earlier. What are some of the advice you can give, not the patients, but the professionals, the people with all the degrees, on how to enhance their communication with their patients to ensure that the patient isn't just having the questions that they ask answered, but the questions they aren't asking?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm just reading the question. As a healthcare professional, it is important for healthcare professionals to make sure they ask their patients if they have any questions. It's crucial so that way the patients are able to relay the information or process the information so that way they can walk away making sure they understand what was discussed in their doctor's appointment. For patients, it's always important to do your research before you go into the appointment. So then that way you know what to potentially expect and to formulate your questions so that way you have an understanding of what you want to cover before you leave the appointment.
Yeah, that's well. And what about if a patient doesn't know what questions to ask, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you advise, right? Because you're seeing patients all the time and they just don't know. I mean, we have people who don't have access to quality healthcare, people who are low income, people who have, there isn't just privilege on race and gender and religion and all the spaces. There's also privilege on education. So patients may not know what to ask their healthcare provider. How do you, as a healthcare provider and a professional, answer the questions that the patient isn't asking? Hey, you might wonder this. Hey, you might wonder that. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, how I counsel patients, counseling is crucial. You want to break things down in a way that the patient will understand. And then if they understand, they're able to ask questions. If you are just throwing big medical jargon in their faces, they may not even understand it to even articulate a question. So as a healthcare professional, it is so important that we explain things in layman terms and also chunk it. So that way a patient can process and then move on to the next phase of counseling. Because when I counsel patients, I always explain, I'll be like, okay, this is the audiogram. I break it up. And I said, do you understand? Yes. Okay. No. Okay. What do you not understand? And then I try to explain it further. So it just really depends. Sometimes you don't want to over explain things to patients. But then you don't also want to under explain. So each person is going to be different. So it's just, as a healthcare professional, is our job to assess the patient and see how we can best provide the information to them as they would understand.
Yeah, and that's about each person's feel in their practice, right? I may have to explain this differently. I had one healthcare professional say to me, sometimes I ask the patient to explain back what I said.
Absolutely.
Just to, hey, so what did I say again? Yeah, tell me in your own words what you heard, right? Mm-hmm. Just to ensure you're checking for understanding, right? With a patient that you're delivering some news that might be hard. Hey, just tell me what I said. Can you tell me, like I'm a third grader? That's what one healthcare provider always said, is that they would be in spaces, especially with patients that they knew there was an economic difference, there was a class difference, there may be a race difference, there might be an ability versus somebody who has a challenge difference. There might be all these things, making sure that you're asking the person, saying to somebody, do you get it? Well, they're probably just going to say, yeah. I mean, I say that to students all the time. Do you know? Sometimes I'll say, so what did I just say? Can you explain to me what I just said in those chunks? Which is really, really smart. So, Jasmine, you got a whole deep, rich life now. You're a whole Dr. Jasmine, which is crazy. But looking ahead, what are some of the aspirations that you have for the impact of some of your advocacy work, obviously your book series, and then your work and your teaching and your training and consulting with healthcare professionals?
So where I see myself going is consulting with healthcare professionals, educating them on how to have empathy towards their patients, and also teaching accessibility within the healthcare world. It is so important to understand how to be more accessible to your patients, because a lot of times different healthcare places, talk about how to be accessible, but they don't actually implement it. So I want to, as a consultant, to educate hospitals, healthcare professionals, businesses on ways to be more inclusive.
Well, and sometimes people think equity is about sameness. I treat everybody fair. Everybody ain't the same, though. I mean, if everyone was the same, we wouldn't need street cutouts to help people who needed to get their wheelchair or their walker or their whatever. We wouldn't need the button to say the walk sign is on. Everybody isn't the same. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest takeaways that I'm hearing you say is how to get healthcare professionals to deal with some of their personal, maybe shame is the word. Pick shame as a word to say, well, but I feel so bad because I got to treat this Black person or this person with this differently. Equity is about, and inclusion is about treating everyone as individuals and seeing them rather than this colorblind, race blind, gender blind, class blind, love blind way of, I treat everybody, but everybody ain't the same. So that doesn't create true inclusion and justice with people. What it does is it cripples people. And then people hide behind, I treat everybody the same. Well, folks ain't the same, though. And so those are some of the pieces that I'm hearing you say on first how to recognize and own your own stuff, your own privilege, your own advantages, but then how to center other people and meet them where they are and recognize that, okay, this is a whole person of color and the history between us and the healthcare industry is really, really, really bad. And so that is a generational DNA thing that as a professional who's made an oath, right, to do no harm, you have to then first start seeing the patient in their whole selves, whether whoever you are. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Sure is fair.
So how do you envision your contributions, right, to ensuring more inclusion in healthcare? Perfect world. Dr. Jasmine can dream, imagine 20, 30 years from now when it's all done. How do you envision your contributions making a difference to creating more inclusion, equity, and justice in healthcare spaces?
So what is extremely important to me, as I said earlier in the talk, is making sure patients are seen, heard, and validated. That is crucial, and that's something what I would like to see going forward is just acceptance. The BIPOC community is able to go to a doctor's appointment and regardless of the healthcare provider's race and feel like they can be heard and feel they can get their medical needs addressed. So that is something I would love to see. But in our society, that is something that is going to be a challenge. But, my goal as a person is if I change one person's perspective, that provider sees hundreds and hundreds of people. So those hundreds and hundreds of people are going to be impacted by that one provider. So it's just honestly just changing one provider's perspective at a time, because then I'm spreading, my mission through those people.
Jasmine Simmons, I am so proud of you. Thank you so very much for your work, for your impact, for blessing the lives of people in this country, and for being a blessing to me. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining me tonight.
And it was absolutely a pleasure being here tonight. And I really enjoyed talking with you tonight and having these discussions.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to this episode of Get Uncomfortable. Get Uncomfortable is produced in partnership between me, Rachel Hansen, and Adam Smith. If you want to hear more from Adam, visit his website, hearadamspeak.com, where you can book him to speak at your organization and hear more about what he has to say about what we talk about here on the show. Now, if you want to support the show itself, there are a variety of ways that you can do that. You can leave us a review anywhere you listen to podcasts, send us an email, or share an episode with a friend. Until next time, stay uncomfortable.